Art director by day and watercolor artist anytime she's not working, Jill Gustavis has an outstanding control over watercolor and several other mediums. What impressed me the most is how she achieved that level in less than 4 years while working a full-time job. Join us today as we discuss how to avoid overwhelm when tackling a new art medium, how Jill's day job boosts and informs her own personal art, and Jill's secret to overcome the fear of wasting great watercolor paper. Hi, I'm Anya, and this is Make More Art, a podcast by Etcher meant to inspire you to keep on creating. Now let's hear it from our guest. You're not the first person that tells me this, that art was always there for them and it was always part of their life. It's really interesting to me because I know a lot of people that didn't even realize art could be an actual job. And then art being something on the side as a hobby, which is something that for everybody who I've been talking with, that's completely normal. So art as a hobby is a thing, art as a job is not. You have a very peculiar combination, which is you do art as your own hobby and your own thing because you love it and you really apparently cannot do anything without it, which I highly admire. And then you have a very creative job that is also art related. So this reality of art being a job for you was always normal? Was that part of your life growing up?
No, not really. Actually, it's kind of an evolution of where like the internet has kind of brought a lot of things. I guess that would be where it kind of all roots from, that interconnectedness. So actually growing up, I loved art growing up. I've actually never been shy to call myself an artist. I was always that kid in class that if they were talking about, you're going to have to do some sort of art project, everyone would, turn around and look at you and just be like, okay, I can't do everyone's, but, so I've never been too shy about that portion. I didn't really get into professional art, like my hobby professional art, until this past year or two.
Oh, wow.
But it's always been something that I pursued. Unfortunately, in high school, it was still kind of not really promoted. Like, to go into art as a profession, like in itself, was definitely still like that starving artist caricature. And so my decision in high school was to pursue a more professional version of art. And so I actually have a degree in interior design. Because I came from a background where my dad was a contractor, so I was very familiar with building. I also really liked like the architecture portion, so I kind of pursued a degree that was like as close as you can get to architecture without being an architect, like still being interior design. But the part I loved the most about that degree was the rendering. And so when I graduated from college in 2008, I did get a job actually doing renderings for about a year, and that's when the recession reached our area of Massachusetts, because we're in like a smaller area, and it kind of rolled in a little later than where it hit everywhere else. So I was laid off, and then it was at that point that I was like, you know what? With the internet, there's a lot. It's starting to become easier to freelance. So I dabbled in graphic design, and then I found my job, my professional job now, which is kind of where all this started. The combination of art as a profession and art really like diving in as a hobby. I actually started in production at the company that I'm at. And to just touch on that, we make compression garments, mostly for women who have lymphedema, but they're patterned. So I did production, and then as the company grew, they had more room in the design department. So now I do illustration. Wow. And it's been doing all these very different illustrations that may not normally be like my style, that it kind of spurred me to get back into my own art more consistently. So it was about 4 years in, I was in charge of the illustrations. And that's when I kind of like really got like my interest piqued by diving into watercolor. And from there, I've begun to do it more steadily as a hobby. And then watching the professional portion of like social media based artists and all these new niches that have come from that with like print on demand services. All these things didn't really exist 15, 20 years ago, when I was picking my profession, or like things like options have definitely changed. And I think people are starting to realize that like there are different niches of art that are very not only accessible, but viable professions.
Mm-hmm. So your active profession inspired you to make more art outside of work hours?
Yeah, and it's kind of interesting because a lot of people like kind of dive into that because of like they're trying to move away from their profession because it's not interesting them, or intellectually stimulating or something like that. But it was actually like almost like the freedom to pursue art that wasn't normally like my like comfort zone,
Mm-hmm.
that kind of like motivated me to explore more on my own terms, and get back into stuff and make the time.
And it's very interesting to me that you say that, because one of the things you said is watercolor. You started exploring watercolors because of your day job at home, and you have beautiful watercolor paintings in your Instagram feed. And it's so you've not even been doing that for a long time. It's what, 4 years?
About 4 years, yeah. I had a set of koi watercolors left over from college.
Mm-hmm.
So I started with those. And at that time, I had joined Instagram to kind of keep myself accountable. So I made my art Instagram in March of 2016.
Okay.
And I started posting my drawings and my little paintings, and they're still there. So if you scroll back all the way, they're still there. And I got myself like a set of Winsor and Newton Cotman paints. I eventually like dabbled in, the handmade watercolors. I had like a small set of green leaf and blueberry paints.
Wow.
And the collection has definitely grown since then. I have more paints than anyone needs at this point, but that's kind of like one of my interests is, the differences in materials. That's one of the things that I'm most drawn to in art. It's just the variations, and it's just kind of blown up from there.
Could you please tell me about the biggest art struggle you ever faced and how you overcame it?
Yeah, I would say the biggest struggle I have is, I guess the easiest way to put it is patience.
Okay.
Not in the putting in like tiny details sort of patience, because I have boatloads of that. I will sit for 4 hours and work on, 1 square inch of painting. I do like detail, but more in the patience of like when people talk about the gap. And I think a lot of artists can relate when they're taking on new or different elements.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's what I'm talking about is the quote from Ira Glass, and it's talking about when people sometimes approach something, they may already have higher taste than their skill level can complete. And so I will, start something new because I like the challenge of something new, but because it doesn't, immediately live up to your expectations, you get frustrated with it, or then I just won't start anything. So it's probably that, especially since I came from doing very realistic acrylics when I was doing art on and off between like college and about 4 years ago. So I have about like 3 acrylic paintings that I did in that span of time. But then I couldn't achieve that in watercolor. That was my only experience with painting. So when I couldn't achieve that, I would get frustrated, and it's taken me 4 years to kind of sink into how does my watercolor work look in comparison to my acrylic work. It's a different beast. It's a different a different process. So I definitely think having the patience to let your work evolve has been my biggest struggle. And I guess to overcome it, I kind of just make myself start stuff. So whether it's just doing a random wash and then, trying to do like an imaginary landscape out of it, or just picking a photo out of my reference photos that I always take and just, just start painting. And then the next piece would be, how do I improve that? And then once you get on like a track, it becomes easier and easier to keep going.
So you develop a habit?
Yeah, developing the habit, and then just trying not to let myself have time to think about what I'm going to do sometimes. I just have to start something. It could be a warm-up. It could be anything.
Dive in head and do like some warm-up super quick. Don't even think about that you're going to paint. Because
I'll psych myself out otherwise. I'll be like, no, I'm really not feeling it today.
And what do you say that made you grow the most as an artist?
I guess if we're talking about like your work, the biggest improvement that I've grown with is when I started a more serious sketchbook practice last year. So I got these 2 sketchbooks in January, and I just started doing these thumbnails. And by a serious sketchbook, I don't mean like it had to be perfect. Quite the opposite, actually. By taking my sketchbook seriously, I actually actively didn't care what came out of it. Wow. I just tried new things. So using thumbnails made it easier to just start, because by breaking up a page into like 6 to 8, thumbnails or any number, the likelihood that you're going to get something that made that page, using that piece of paper that may be precious, so worthwhile, your chances go up that, you're going to get something great out of that page, whether it's discovering a new color, discovering a new technique. A lot of people have that fear of wasting good material. And the way that it's worked for me to use more of it, because you only, get any use out of it if you use it, has been to do these thumbnails in my sketchbook. And I've just seen so much growth since last spring in my own work. Wow. And it's not necessarily like, I had a goal of being able to do a very specific thing at the year and I've reached that. It's kind of been like, oh, I didn't know I really like to paint like this. I may have started off with, I'd like to paint more realistically. And I found out I have the most fun painting more expressively with weird brush shapes, or you never know what you're going to find along the road.
So when you sit down to do these thumbnail sketches, what is your intention?
There's different ways that I approach them. And so it could be I'm exploring color, and then it's just, I could have random colors. I could be very specific with, I'm looking for warm colors, I'm looking for a mood, I'm looking for something. It could be, what I most use it for is I'm looking at a reference photo or I'm plein air painting, and I don't know how to draw what I'm looking at the most interesting. And so I'll just try different random compositions. And any of these approaches have helped me kind of with one of the biggest things I've also struggled with, which is not painting exactly what's there. And I think a lot of artists struggle with breaking that line. And it's definitely helped me start not using what we call local colors. So using colors that aren't necessarily what my eye sees, but I think they make the painting look more interesting, or moving things in the composition. Doing these little thumbnails kind of gives me the license to just play around a little bit, because I'm not ruining, quote unquote, a painting. You have that freedom.
Wow. In painting small, I guess it's easier because you have a bunch of little trials in front of you and you can just quickly jump from one to the other.
Yes. And that's like a huge thing, because then if I got 6 different examples going on, I'm remembering what I learned from each one, and I could either improve on it or be able to compare it between 2 different ones in the same session. And having that train of thought not get interrupted, I've definitely, been able to form new opinions. And I think that's like a huge portion of being able to kind of explore my own aesthetic in art. And Instead of being like, well, I don't know how to paint that. I'll Google, how do I paint this subject? I just do a bunch of thumbnails and see how would I paint that subject? How do I enjoy painting that subject?
Awesome.
And it's definitely made me feel more independent and in control of like my own art. And the more I've done, the more adventurous I guess I get in like what chances I want to take. And if I can't fit it all, in the same session, then I take a million notes. I'm sure you've probably seen a couple of my Instagram posts where they're like this, it'll be like painting, but like I think the rest of the page is just covered in writing.
Yeah, and I love it. And I think it's amazing and it's so energetic, and there's a lot of very bold decisions that you made in those thumbnails. So for our audience who's listening to us right now and they're struggling with breaking into a new sketchbook or trying new materials or even just starting to make more art, after everything you just said, any last words you'd like to say to them?
I don't know. Everything's viable. I think people kind of look down on, but it's not going to be the art that I want to make. And I think that the art that you're making will bring you to the art that you want to make. I think that everything is, whether you're making it at a coffee table, at a kitchen table, I paint at all those locations. I paint everywhere in my house. Or you're working with one brush or 10 brushes, or the art that you're making is legitimate. It's a good thing in this world.
You can take a look at Jill's art on her website at jillgustavis.com. Today, Jill shared her secret to overcome the blank page. Do you have your own secret as well? We'd love to hear it from you, so please tell us and find all the show notes on the podcast associated with this episode at etchrlab.com/Jill. That's etchrlab.com/JILL. Like the podcast? Please help us by subscribing and giving us a 5-star rating and review on Apple Podcasts at etchrlab.com/Apple. Thank you for listening and see you next time. Until then, let's make more art.